everybody. Welcome to the Dreamer's Edge podcast. I'm sitting with
Nicholas. I write video game reviews for thedreamersedge.com.
Francois, librarian and part-time writer.
Chris, subtitler and occasional writer.
Eric, teacher, sometimes writer.
And I'm Dimitri, webmaster of thedreamersedge.com and movie critic. And today we're following up our discussion from last week's episode, which was all about the best of the aughts, or double O's is what you call them. I like that one. We're each going to list our top 3 movies of the last decade. Who's next? Nick?
Well, my number 3 we already talked about, but I'm not going to change because I did not see a lot of movies last decade.
All right.
So it was The Dark Knight. Number 2, American Psycho.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to describe as a movie. Let's call it a yuppie that's a serial killer, kind of dead inside, and he kills people to the sound of 80s music while describing the music itself. I was watching that. I was like, what the hell am I looking at? But it was a great movie, really enjoyable. Christian Bale is magnificent in that.
He sells it. He sells it.
Well,
I have to say I'm very partial to that movie. It speaks to me on a number of levels. There's so many little scenes in that movie, but the card scene to me particularly is it's very interesting. But as you say, you're so right. Like Christian Bale, so completely manages to pull it off. It is very quirky.
Such enthusiasm when he's killing people. He puts the raincoat on. I was like, is that a raincoat? Yes, it is. Like super happy, and it's just so fun to watch. I mean, I don't normally like murders and stuff like that in movies, but he was like, wow, he is awesome. Who is he killing next? Come on.
That's the movie that made me discover Christian Bale. And this is not a joke. This is not a joke. This is not me retroactively placing myself as a casting genius. I saw American Psycho, and I came out of the theater going like, oh, I hope he plays Batman in the next Batman movie. Because the way he plays Bateman as this sort of like, on the exterior, this happy-go-lucky playboy yuppie. On the interior, this big ball of like anger and frustration is like, that's Bruce Wayne. You know?
That's funny because I thought that after seeing Equilibrium, but it was still like, this should be Batman.
I think there's also like what I find interesting about that movie is it's incredibly satirical, which to me is like I really enjoy that. And there's a very damning comment to that movie, which is that throughout this entire movie, he goes around trying to confess openly his crimes, and these are very twisted and very funny scenes. But it's also a comment on how you have this, we live in a society where you suddenly find out that your next door neighbor is this crazy killer and he's like buried people in the basement and whatnot, but we weren't really aware, and he was such a nice guy, and there's an element throughout the movie that recurs constantly of him, he's stating it outright, and these people that are around him are so wrapped up in their own lives and their own little things. Reese Witherspoon, what a casting! What a casting for that movie. The whole dessert cake thing. It's a very dark movie, but it's a very funny movie.
Absolutely. And I think when you describe the satire, you nailed it, because I found that a lot of people are misinterpreting the movie, which has been the frustration of the director. I think.
I was trying to remember what she's done recently.
The Moth Diaries is her latest.
Oh,
one.
really? Okay,
yeah.
That's getting already good reviews.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
yeah, I'm liking the name too.
I want to say Mary Herron, but she's expressed a lot of frustration because a lot of people have misinterpreted the movie, because it is as you say, it's about him, but it's about everybody else around him, or who attribute such a sense of self-importance to everything they touch that they have no sense of what actually is important in life.
It was really it was a fully realized take on something, and almost going back to what Frank was talking about earlier in terms of Lord of the Rings. I liked this. This was a vision of the source material, not a slavish reproduction of the source material, and it stood its own and unique piece of art. Unlike Snyder's Watchmen, which was just the same thing, just in a different format.
All I gotta say is I'll never listen to Huey Lewis and the News ever again.
And that is so true, though. Every time I hear the name Huey Lewis and the News, that's what I think about.
I'm thinking
now.
of putting an axe in some guy's head. The thought just pops in there. So number 1,
Howl's Moving Castle. which is an anime about a young girl who's very shy and she gets cursed by a witch and becomes old and she needs house help to become young again. It was an anime that showed me that the Japanese animation can be, something else than big explosion and robots and
Sex.
And yes, sex, or guys powering up for 3 episodes.
Or sex with robots with big explosions while the guy powers up.
Exactly.
In giant robots.
But it was a great story. It was like so much stuff to look at on the screen. You're looking at it, you're like, wow, and so many other things are happening that have nothing to do with the main story too, that just get wrapped up in like, oh, okay, that's what's here, that's what's there. It was just really fun to watch.
I agree. The beauty of Hayao Miyazaki's work, who the director of House Moving Castle, I find in animation, and nobody has copied him, and I don't understand why, is his introduction of silence in an animated movie.
This is the guy that did the Princess and Spirited Away?
Yes, exactly. Princess Mononoke and Spirit.
Yeah.
In House Moving Castle, they have a castle that if you open the door, it leads you somewhere else.
Yeah.
And it's a strange concept, And what's great about it is that the characters who encounter this for the first time, before opening the door to go wherever they want, they always have that little pause going like, do I really want to do this? And then they open it. And it's never, it's not a dramatic moment. It's not a beat. It's just human behavior being animated. And that's what I find so beautiful about his work in general.
But that's interesting. It's a very cinematic thing about silences, where I find that this is the one thing that European films have more than some Americans don't have. They constantly feel the need to, have people talking.
Or the music.
Yeah,
and
yeah, exactly. And it kind of builds up the tension, and I like that. I really like those silences.
And then there's also this sense of, wonderment, and, just the changing shapes, and, and the storyline going. It's just and it was just visually captivating, and it was a lot of fun. I think it's a really good choice. Actually, I had Spirited Away on my list, which has now since been revised, but in terms of both films, I think they're both gems.
A lot of people stay away from those because it's animation, and they think of Akira and Dragon Ball and stuff like that.
Think of all the worst niche things with these annoying fanboys, but these are films. They're just
otaku.
Yeah.
And that's 2 Christian Bale movies. Wow.
3 with Dark Knight. So.
Oh, that's true. That's 3 Christian Bale movies.
Yeah.
Wow.
All 3 of them with Christian Bale. So. It was the decade of Christian Bale.
Okay, so I'll start. Number 3 would be Children of Men.
Hey!
2006.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of science fiction, but I don't like when people say they don't like science fiction just because they're only thinking about giant robots or really, like the space operas or whatever. Like, science fiction could just be like one different premise that creates a different world. It makes it speculative. It's just nothing else needs to be weird about it. But it's a different type of reality. And how fully fleshed can you make it? And this movie I found did a really good job with that. I really like the P.D. James source material. It's interesting. But in terms of the film itself, okay, fine. It's got a little bit of shaky cam stuff, but it's also got some of the most interesting sustained shots. And in terms of a science fiction world that's not overly done, it does bring you the information of the world really well, very quickly, and suddenly you understand the state of this world where people just can't conceive anymore, and why it's so important that this one person has basically conceived, and what it suddenly takes to keep this person alive so that they can give birth.
And the guy never uses a gun.
Yeah, exactly.
Throughout the entire film, he's running around and he's just an ordinary guy.
Yeah, it's just Clive Owen's really, really good in this one.
Yeah, he is.
You mentioned the camera work, and I think that's one of the most amazing things about this movie. Because there's one sustained shot where he goes through like a ravaged street in the middle of war, and he's running from one end of the street to the other, not in a straight line at all.
Yeah.
And the camera stays, and it's and you watch this, and it's big. It's big science fiction happening, but it's not effects heavy or anything.
No.
It feels grounded and real, and you're like, how did they do that? How did they pull that off?
And at the same time, as opposed to the Batmans of the world, exactly what's happening at all times, even though there's so much going on around him. He's tripping over things, falling down, things are exploding, but you're fully brought into the story. It was great.
I remembered instantly the realism of that entire scene, and how it's really one of those things where when there's when you're in the middle of a war, the bullet can come from anywhere.
Yeah.
It's one thing when you're fighting a war and it's sort of okay, well, we're over here and the enemy's over there.
Yeah, exactly.
But
the good guys shoot red and the bad guys shoot blue, and everyone can dodge.
Yeah. But then you have the situation where you're just the kind of person that's trying to cross through town and survive, and you don't have a stake in this entire thing. So it was really that element of it. But then there's a scene that comes after that, which is really sort of like, there's a long sustained shot towards the end of the movie where essentially the camera sort of basically pans across as you see the shocked expressions of various people. And I have to say that in a sense the movie is a kind of a build up to that moment where the secret's out to a certain extent. I don't want to really spoil it, but I think that to me was like really the essence of the movie.
Number 2 was Pan's Labyrinth. I've got like 5 number 2s. But I chose that was on the same tier as Spirited Away, and Up. Almost kind of like this sense of a little bit the wonder of childhood, where it's just like things could be both beautiful but also frightening. This one though I found was just amazing, just in terms of like the soundscape and just like how quickly it brings you into these weird little places that are just really scary.
It takes place during just
the
Spanish Civil War, and then there's the fairy tale stuff. And the thing is that if you were to remove them and make 2 movies out of them, each works perfectly well.
Yeah.
So there's never a time where you're bored or where you're like, get back to the fairy tale stuff or get back to the real drama. This is silly. Everything's compelling in it.
The one world is the child's world, and they're seeing one story, and the other is the world of the adult, and they're seeing the world from a different way. And it's slowly those worlds start to collide, and it's really well done the way it kind of brings that together.
And just the special effects, the makeup, the creatures, the way they look, and even the sound effects. Like, you often hear the general, like his the leather glove, and everything else. Like
the creaking of the wood.
Exactly. Yeah. And I thought just technically it was beautiful, and the story is really, really good.
And if you look at it several times, you realize that a lot of the fairy tale creatures reflect a lot of the adults in the little girl's life and how she perceived them at that state in their lives. And all of that becomes very fascinating. And going back to the idea that there's 2 stories that, a lot of movies try for an ambiguous ending, and the ambiguity is itself the ending. This one also has an ambiguous ending, but what I like about it is that if you were to pick one interpretation, it works as a full story. If you were to pick another interpretation, it works as a full story. Like Inception doesn't even have that, where there's 2 possibilities at the end of Inception, spoiler alert, but only one of them actually makes a climax. The other is just sort of like, yeah. Whereas Pan's Labyrinth, no matter what your mindset is, you get a full experience. And that's led a lot of people to sort of just take it for granted that their interpretation is the only interpretation of the movie. And I found it very fascinating that you can tell who's an optimist and who's a pessimist by asking them what happens at the end of Pan's Labyrinth. And by the answer, you can sort of tell what kind of person they are.
And number 1 would be Once, 2007. I'm usually not a fan of musicals, but in this case, like, the music just drives the story. You get to know the characters through them, and really, again, it's a sense of 2 people getting to know each other, but they're able to kind of voice some of their feelings through the music, through just the practice of music, the routine of music. And it's not a world I'm in any way familiar with or like, but I was completely drawn into it, and it's a really, really sweet, true love affair, and I liked it a lot.
Yeah. And the songs are just great. You end up finishing the film and you just sing those songs. You keep thinking about it. You're still humming at the end of the film.
Oh yeah, it's one of those movies. You watch it, you buy the soundtrack as soon as you come out of the theaters. You just do it.
And it's one of those things that you want to share with other people. It's like, so have you seen it? No, you haven't seen it? So we're renting it tonight, right?
It's not too long. It's fine.
Look at this. It's in my bag right now.
It helps as well is that he took real musicians as the actors.
Exactly.
And I don't know how he managed to coach them, but their performance comes off so earnest. The sexual tension between the 2 characters just feels natural. It doesn't feel manufactured in any way,
There's a great scene where, you get the sound guy that looks bored, and he's like, okay, here's some idiots that are going to record their little tape, and He's already phoning and planning ahead what he's going to do that evening. And then all of a sudden he starts to get grabbed by the song. And he's like, okay, this is pretty good. And he starts finicking with the sound and everything. And when the guy's done, he's like, did you write that? And the guy says yes. And the guy is basically, okay, this is good. I actually want to spend time and harness this and actually help out. And it's a great scene that really works. And I was like, yeah, me too. I'm listening to the song too. I'm in it.
All right. What I love about being last is that I get to revise my list and go like, oh no, I thought of that movie, but someone else mentioned it, so that's gonna come up a lot. All right. So as my number 3, I'm gonna go ahead and say, which was actually my number 5, but it got bumped to number 3 now. It's Shaolin Soccer, 2001.
Oh, that was fun.
This movie.
Great choice.
Stephen Chow.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's just funny. It's like I don't really have anything profound to say about it because it really isn't. It's a bunch of dudes who play soccer as if they were in a kung fu movie. That's the running gag, and it's freaking hilarious. That's all there is to it. And that movie is actually the movie that dethroned Jackie Chan over in China as the number 1 box office grosser. Every Jackie Chan movie that has ever come out was number 1 on the box office consistently.
Okay.
And then Shaolin Soccer came out, and the Jackie Chan movie came out, and Shaolin Soccer went number 1, and the Jackie Chan movie.
So like at the time of the release, they got the number 1 spot.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
His next movie, Kung Fu Hustle, or Kung Fu if you're in China, actually is the highest grossing movie in China, period. But, I'm talking about Shaolin Soccer. It's funny. It's the jokes are so ridiculous, and the actors are so charming. You can tell they're having fun, and that's the best part. There's a part where they're dressed as Chinese monks singing at a karaoke bar about the awesomeness of Shaolin Soccer, and neither of the actors can keep a straight face. It's the funniest thing ever to watch.
Like there's space for kind of like just ridiculous hokey comedy, and you're right, like Shaolin Soccer really just like tapped into that and sucked all of the humor out of it and like spewed it onto the screen. And just the physical comedy is just great.
Tons of nose picking.
It's funny.
It's ridiculous. It's immature at the same time. I loved it. I thought it was funny and fun.
And it's immature, but it's not crass, which is also
that's
it. Right, my number 2 pick was going to be Spirited Away, but you've already talked about House Moving Castle. And the truth is, although they're different movies, they both have the same qualities, which is why Chris and I are just we'll talk about something else. So it was then going to be Pan's Labyrinth. So I'm going to go with Sin City. Sin City, I know it's a controversial choice for some.
Frank is bracing himself.
Yeah. I'm gonna get it from Frank. That's good. Get a little bit of attention in this podcast. But I go with again the theory of like, we used to make movies one way, and then the movie came out, and we did movies another way. And like, Sin City is a movie that ushered the digital camera once and for all. That ushered the idea of filming things, virtually, essentially the virtual set in a way that to me works. Like, say what you will about Sin City, its rhythm and whatnot, and those are all good criticisms of the movie. There's never a moment where you don't believe in that universe, even though it's completely manufactured. And that's an interesting thing. You can't say that about 300 or, Watchmen. Or Sky Captain and The World of Tomorrow, actually. And what I like about it is that it's the first movie for me that captured comic books. Not the specific characters of the comic books, but comic books. Because the best comic book adaptations at that point captured who the hero was and brought them to a new medium, which is what an adaptation is supposed to do. It's certainly not to diss them, but what Robert Rodriguez did is sort of adapted cinema to comic book, and all the dynamic appeal of pulp magazines and all of that all got transferred in a way that a decade earlier Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy.
I think Dick Tracy tried to do that, and it just failed.
It felt static, it felt boring, it felt ponderous. This one was like, that movie comes off like a maniac. Like Frank, you commented earlier that the movie is too fast, but I think that's what comic books are. A fight scene lasts 3 panels, not half an hour. and that's sort of what happens.
I would say Sin City's, I consider it more of a graphic novel. Like it took a slower approach. Like the what was Bruce Willis' character? Like I think Hardigan. There we go.
Because he has a big heart.
He
Frank
has
Miller
big
is a
heart.
subtle writer.
Yeah, definitely. There's a scene where he receives a package while he's in prison, and it's a grisly, scary package. And I had the sense when I was reading the graphic novel of a man trapped inside prison walls, not able to do a thing. And really,
that's how I feel when I read Frank Miller.
Like there's a measure of really the time going by and him like slowly almost becoming insane inside his cell. And in the movie, I think there's about a half a second between the opening of the package and the scream, and there's no.
That's because we'd already seen the 7. You know what I mean? Like it's just like there are certain things. You know what I mean? That I think I don't think it's quite as black and white as you're making it. I think it's accelerated to its detriment, but I see that you're not filming the characters; it's filming the aesthetic of the art. You know what I mean? Which I liked. But the thing that I think Frank Miller's graphic novel, or pamphlet comics brought to it was a sense of slower pace, because it was so stylized in terms of black and white. It's not the question of turning the page. Like sometimes you'd have to stare at that for a little bit to actually start seeing the shape. And that's what you lose in the movie.
And the noir
because it
feel.
is so crisp. You've got the noir feel. You've got the over.
No, but I mean, like there's
But there's a sense of like. I'm looking at the panels, but I see them too quickly. And that's what I didn't like. You know what I mean? Like I did like a kind of a sense of like. Oh, okay, now I'm seeing the shape of it. Like, okay, it's rain. Okay, I got it. You know what I mean? Like, and it's just like, but it was very unique. But as a film, I think it's as unique because, like you said, it's no holds barred. It's like it's its own thing. Completely, and it changed the way we kind of looked at it. It wasn't just a Spider-Man. It wasn't just a character that we knew. We were watching a comic, but no one, except for the couple of geeks, really knew the source material. Yeah,
I know I spoke somewhat negatively earlier, but I still think that it is a very good movie. I think. When you mentioned that it ushered the digital, I think it was shot from start to finish in digital, right?
Yeah.
Like as opposed to because I think the new Star Wars trilogy predates probably.
Well, the first one was shot on film. The second one is the one he shot on.
Digital. Okay. There is definitely like an element of the aesthetic, like and like you say, it's a very stylized graphic novel. So it was a big challenge to shoot it. It's black and white. Of course, you've got that effect of color halfway through the movie. I mean, it kind of works. Like I said, there are some elements of pacing. I thought the casting was really spot on.
It just revived Mickey Rourke's career, huh?
Pretty much.
Because he's perfect. That is the perfect casting.
But it's not just a casting, I think. His performance itself is... Because I love the fact that, in this story, he has eventually a clash between another character, and they're like two animals.
Yeah.
And throughout the entire movie, Ricky Rourke is sort of moving like a gorilla and like deliberately imitating, a half man, half animal creature. And it's like it's such a subtle choice for an over the top movie, but it's so good.
Yep. And he's just driven by emotion. Like there's not much logic in what he's doing. He's just going ahead, and like if you hit a wall, he'd probably just keep bashing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty much.
But you got that just from from very little in terms of how they sketched out the character. So.
Yeah. All right, my number one pick was going to be The Dark Knight, but that was taken.
So you're going with Inception.
Multiple times. So I'm gonna go with one that's more of a personal choice, but $1 Million Baby.
Oh, I like that.
2004 Clint Eastwood movie about a boxer. It's one of the few boxing movies, or even sports movie when you think about it, that does not copy the Rocky formula. That actually does its own thing entirely.
Yeah, it's more of a Karate Kid.
No. Although Hilary Swank was the new Karate Kid.
Exactly.
But and it takes a dramatic turn in the third act that you'll never see coming. And what I like about it is how they treat that element especially, because then the whole first two acts are more a question of getting to know how these people are, to inform a little bit what you would do in the dilemma that's presented, and whether or not the decision that's finally taken is the right one. And a lot of the right-wing people who complain about what the movie says don't realize that the movie's actually taking their side of the debate, but doing it with intelligent arguments, and therefore, for some reason, that means that the big protesters weren't going to get that. Like, that was the weirdest thing. But the argument presented is some of the most intelligent, thoughtful, and sort of convincing argument for that position that the movie takes on that dilemma.
Morgan Freeman's performance is fantastic, and I really like him.
Well, Clint Eastwood and Morgan Freeman, like they're such veterans, and you know they've collaborated obviously before, and then you get to a point now where these guys know each other's beats, know each other's moves, and Clint Eastwood, like when they'll reevaluate his career, like in decades to come, he turns out to be like a pretty decent actor, like I mean for what he does, but you know in the later half of his career, he's sort of extended that. He's taken that sort of that role that he has, but he's expanded on it, and you know, but hey, he's directing too. Like, I don't know, like I'm really impressed by the guy.
Yeah, I liked the film, and I certainly am intrigued with what Clint Eastwood's doing in this latter half of his career for sure. So I like to see him kind of popping up on these lists. You know, like I don't know if it's among his best, and I have to admit, Hilary Swank just bugs me.
Oh, come on, she's no Winona Ryder.
No, but she should be.
So, alright, so I guess that concludes this episode. If you want to share with us your favorite movies of the last decade, you can mail us at mail@thedreamersedge.com or post a comment below on our comments board at thedreamersedge.com. Until next time.
Alright.
Excellent.
See ya.
He's stating it outright, and these people that are around him are so wrapped up in their own lives and their own little things. You know, I mean, Reese Witherspoon, what a casting! What a casting for that movie. I mean, you know, the whole like dessert cake thing. I just, you know, it's a very dark movie, but it's a very funny movie.
Absolutely. And I think when you described the satire, you know, you nailed it, because I found that a lot of people are misinterpreting the movie, which has been the frustration of the director. I think.
I was trying to remember what she's done recently. But...
The Moth Diaries is her latest.
Oh,
movie.
really? Okay,
yeah.
That's getting already good reviews.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
yeah, I'm liking on the name too.
I want to say Mary Herron, but she's expressed a lot of frustration because a lot of people.
I think there's also like what I find interesting about that movie is it's incredibly satirical, which to me is like I really enjoy that. And there's a very damning comment to that movie, which is that throughout this entire movie, he goes around trying to confess openly his crimes, and these are very twisted and very funny scenes. But it's also a comment on how you have this, you know, we live in a society where you suddenly find out that your next door neighbor is this crazy killer and he's like buried people in the basement and whatnot, but, you know, we weren't really aware, you know, and he was such a nice guy, you know, like, and there's an element throughout the movie that recurs constantly of him, like, I mean...
But I'm not going to change because I did not see a lot of movies last decade.
Right.
So it was The Dark Knight. Number 2, American Psycho.
Yeah.
Which is kind of hard to describe as a movie. Let's call it a yuppie that's a serial killer, kind of dead inside, and he kills people to the sound of 80s music while describing the music itself. I was watching that. I was like, what the hell am I looking at? But it was a great movie, really enjoyable. Christian Bale is magnificent in that.
He sells it. He sells it. I have to say I'm very partial to that movie. It speaks to me on a number of levels. There's so many little scenes in that movie, but the card scene to me particularly is it's very interesting. But as you say, you're so right. Like Christian Bale, like so completely manages.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Dreamer's Edge podcast. I'm sitting with
Nicholas. I write video game reviews for thedreamersedge.com.
Francois, librarian and part-time writer.
Chris, subtitler and occasional writer.
Eric, teacher, sometimes writer.
And I'm Dimitri, webmaster of thedreamersedge.com and movie critic. And today we're following up our discussion from last week's episode, which was all about the best of the aughts, or double O's is what you call them. I like that one. We're each going to list our top 3 movies of the last decade. Who's next? Nick?
Well, my number 3, we already talked about.
To pull it off, it is very quirky.
Such enthusiasm when he's killing people. He puts the raincoat on. I was like, is that a raincoat? Yes, it is. Like, super happy, and it's just so fun to watch. And I don't normally like murders and stuff like that in movies, but he was like, wow, he is awesome. Who is he killing next? Come on.
That's the movie that made me discover Christian Bale. And this is not a joke. Like, this is not a joke. This is not me retroactively placing myself as a casting genius. I saw American Psycho, and I came out of the theater going like, oh, I hope he plays Batman in the next Batman movie. Because the way he plays Bateman as this sort of like, on the exterior, this happy-go-lucky playboy yuppie. On the interior, this big ball of like anger and frustration is like, that's Bruce Wayne. You know?
That's funny because I thought that after seeing Equilibrium, but it was still like, this should be Batman.